I'm Nathan Rutherford. Welcome to Myth Madness. Sing, O Muse, of the anger of Achilles, son of Peleus, that brought countless ills upon the Achaeans. Many a brave soul did it send hurrying down to Hades, and many a hero did it yield a prey to dogs and vultures. Those are the opening lines of Homer's famous poem, the Iliad, composed sometime in the 8th century BC. But I think similar words can be said for another famous Greek hero, Heracles. In the next few episodes, I'm going to cover many of the Greek myths concerning this hero. Like with Homer's words about Achilles, a key feature of Heracles is his anger, or perhaps rage is a better word. Because of that rage, Heracles is almost his own worst enemy. It's going to get him into a lot of trouble, and it's going to send a lot of brave souls down to Hades. This episode, though, will set the stage for a lot of that anger. I'll cover his ancestors, his parents, their own adventures, and the hero's youth. In terms of sources, Apollodorus' library is an excellent source for the Heracles myths, and like with the Perseus episodes, it provides the backbone of my retellings here. Okay, so let's start with what happened before Heracles was born. Back in the second Perseus episode, I talked about how the hero kings Perseus and Pelops originally fought against one another, but that they eventually made peace, came together, and joined their families. Perseus and his wife Andromeda had several sons, while Pelops and his wife Hippodamia had a number of daughters. A very convenient setup for the two kings, and in the peace process they matched up their children into multiple couples. Some of those couples are going to have children that will prove important for this episode's story. First, there is Perseus' son Sthenelus and Pelops' daughter Nikope. Another couple was Perseus' son Alectryon and Pelops' daughter Eurydice. They became the parents of a daughter named Alkmene. At the same time, Perseus' son Alcaeus married Pelops' daughter Astidamia. Their son was named Amphitryon. Sometimes Amphitryon's mother is a different woman, but I'll go with the Astidamia version here. The sons of Perseus, Sthenelus, Alectryon, and Alcaeus, inherited different parts of their father's southern Greek kingdom, but we can imagine that they were bound by family loyalties, alliances, and maybe a little sibling rivalry. And then, of course, there were extra marriages. The two cousins, Amphitryon and Alkmene, had an arranged marriage set up by their parents. Sometimes Amphitryon tried to propose a marriage to Alkmene himself. But whatever the specifics of the arrangement, Alkmene agreed to marry him, but not right away. To marry her, Alkmene wanted Amphitryon to do one tiny little thing first. But the request that follows is not going to end up being a single, simple task. It's actually going to turn into a complicated series of quests for Amphitryon. To explain, let's back up a bit. Alkmene's father was Alectryon, and he inherited the city of Mycenae from Perseus. The rest of his brothers ruled the other neighboring cities, Tiryns for instance, but it's a little hard to tell exactly which ones, since in the different sources, different brothers are named as the kings of different cities. But let's just say they all lived in roughly the same area and ruled the surrounding lands and most of the time got along well. But another side of the family was going to change that. Because there was, in fact, yet another match between the families of Perseus and Pelops. This other match was between Perseus' son Mestor and Pelops' daughter Lysidyche. But unlike with their other brothers and sisters, the descendants of this couple did not live with the others near Mycenae. This was because when Mestor and Lysidyche's daughter Hippothoe was a young woman, she was kidnapped by Poseidon and taken far away to some islands. There, she gave birth to Poseidon's son Taphos, and he became the founder of a group of people called the Taphians, who lived on those islands. Taphos had a son named Tereleos, and he, in turn, had 6 sons of his own. Eventually, those 6 sons came with an army of Taphians to Mycenae. They claimed that since they were also descended from Perseus, they should have a kingdom for their own, just like their distant cousins. But Alkmene's father, King Amphitryon, just ignored them. The sons of Heracles didn't have enough support to back up their claim with force. Still, they didn't want to leave completely empty-handed. The sons of Heracles tried to steal some of Amphitrion's cattle instead. While conducting the raid, the sons of Heracles were attacked by Amphitrion's sons. The woodland pasture where the cattle were kept quickly turned into a bloody battlefield. All of Amphitrion's sons, except for one named Alkmene, died, and all of the sons of Heracles were also killed, except for one named Heracles, who they had left behind to guard their ships. However, even with the deaths of their leaders, the surviving Taphians were still able to steal a large number of Amphitrion's cattle and sail away with them in their ships. With his sons dead and cattle stolen, old King Amphitryon wanted revenge. He entrusted the kingdom of Mycenae to Amphitryon, and made sure he would take care of his daughter Alkmene until he got back with the stolen cattle. Without even needing to fight for them, Amphitryon found the cattle. The Taphians had actually left them with another king for safekeeping, and Amphitryon tried to gather the cows up and take them back home. But while Amphitryon was herding the cattle, one of the bulls became agitated and charged him. Amphitryon threw his club at the bull. It bounced off the bull's horns, hit Amphitryon in the face, and killed him. With Amphitryon now dead, things back in Mycenae were about to turn ugly. The whole happy family dynamic of all the sons of Perseus was about to break down. Amphitrion's brother, Sthenelus, who ruled the nearby city of Tiryns, was the first to make his move. Sthenelus marched an army to Mycenae, banished his nephew Amphitryon, and took over Mycenae, uniting the two kingdoms. Amphitryon, Alkmene, and Amphitrion's only surviving son, Alkmene, went into exile. They left southern Greece completely, and traveled north to Thebes, where they sought refuge with its ruler, Creon. Once they were in Thebes, this is when Alkmene shared with Amphitryon what he would need to do to see the two of them married. Alkmene wanted him to promise that he would find justice for her brothers' deaths, and seek revenge on the raiders from Taphos and the family of Heracles. Exiled with no resources, this was not going to be an easy task. Amphitryon nevertheless agreed. In Hesiod's Shield of Heracles poem, Alkmene is described as surpassing all other women in beauty and in height, and in wisdom nobody born from mortal women and mortal men came close to her. For Amphitryon, you could say that she was worth it. What's more, Alkmene surely loved him too. The Shield of Heracles actually gives a slightly different version of the story. In it, Alkmene still wanted Amphitryon to avenge her brothers, but Hesiod also makes Amphitryon responsible for killing her father. Apparently they had an argument over cattle, and that was why he was exiled. Alkmene followed him to Thebes anyway, though. Returning to Apollodorus' version, Amphitryon needed some support if he was going to defeat the Taphians. He went to Creon, the ruler of their new home city of Thebes, for help. Sure enough, Creon did promise to provide Amphitryon with an army, but only if he did something to help his new home first. This quest within a quest was to rid the Theban countryside of a beastly fox that was ravaging the area. This fox was called the Taumesian fox. Funny enough, Apollodorus and another poet from the 2nd century AD named Antinous Liberalis are the only two sources who tie the fox to Amphitryon. So let's go through what the other sources say about the fox first, and then go back to Apollodorus. The earliest available source, a fragment from the lost 7th century BC epic poem, the Epigony, tells where the Taumesian fox came from. The beast was sent by the gods to punish the descendants of the first king of Thebes, Cadmus. Similarly, Pausanias, almost 800 years later, says the fox was sent by Dionysus to destroy Thebes. Either way, the Thebans offended the gods. To keep the beast away, Apollodorus says that the Thebans had to leave out one of their children, once a month, for the fox to take and eat. Of course, that solution was only going to happen for so long. Eventually, the Thebans tried to kill the fox, but it would always get away. The problem was the Taumesian fox was uncatchable, so the Thebans were going to need some outside help to defeat it. How do you catch an uncatchable fox? Well, hunt it with an inescapable dog. Fortunately, such a dog was conveniently owned by a man named Cepheus. Back in the episode on King Minos, I talked about how the Cretan king gave a woman a magic hound that no prey could escape in return for helping his wife. That woman was Cepheus's wife, Procris. And the hound was the same one now needed to catch the Taumessian fox. According to Apollodorus and Antonius Liberalis, Amphitryon recruited Cepheus to come with this dog and hunt the fox. In return for helping him out, Amphitryon offered Cepheus half of all the treasure and loot they would get from the defeated Taphians. So Cepheus set out and hunted the uncatchable fox with the inescapable hound. Who won? Who lost? How was this paradox resolved? All the Greek sources say that both the hound and the fox were turned to stone, and so were never proven catchable or escapable. With the Taumessian fox no longer eating young Theban children, Creon was happy. He assembled a Theban army and told Amphitryon he was ready to help the hero avenge his bride-to-be's brothers. The Shield of Heracles poem hints at an even larger army of supporters. The poem says Amphitryon led an army of horse-driving Thebans, breathing above their shields, Locrians who fight hand-to-hand, and Phocians too. The people from these two other places are also fairly close to Thebes. It's unclear if Amphitryon had to do things to get them to follow him, though, or if they were part of the larger Theban army. Nevertheless, with well-armed soldiers to back him up, Amphitryon set out to attack the Taphos Islands. But once again, there was just one more problem. One more obstacle stood in Amphitryon's way to completing Alkmene's quest. Heracles was the king of the Taphian Islands. Remember, it was Poseidon who kidnapped his grandmother, and the ruler of the sea really liked the island king. To show his patronage, Poseidon made Heracles immortal, by making a single gold hair sprout on his head and then decreeing that Heracles would not die until the hair got plucked out. We've actually seen something like this before. In the Minos episode, there was a king named Nisus, and he also had hair that prevented him from dying. But in this story, if Amphitryon wanted to successfully invade the Taphian Islands, capture the capital city, and get revenge on the Taphians, the surviving son of Heracles, and the king himself, Amphitryon would have to get rid of that golden hair first. As it happened, Heracles had a daughter named Cametho, and Cametho fell in love with our aspiring conqueror, Amphitryon. Probably not a good idea to develop feelings for the guy who wants to kill your father, but hey, Cametho can't control her feelings. Because of this, Cametho went, and probably while her father was fast asleep, she plucked out the golden hair. She killed her own father, all in order to please Amphitryon. When Cametho came to Amphitryon to profess her love and tell him what she had done for him, Amphitryon was not impressed. In fact, he was disgusted. He sentenced her to death for her betrayal of her own family. Then, with Heracles dead and the Taphians leaderless, Amphitryon sacked the city and killed the last surviving son of Heracles. The sons of Electryon were avenged. His job finally done, Amphitryon sailed back to Thebes. A few moments ago, I mentioned how Alkmene was the tallest, most beautiful mortal woman in the world. Her face and dark eyes were a match for the charms of the goddess Aphrodite, but Alkmene was also wise and intelligent too. And it wasn't just Amphitryon who noticed all this. Everyone did, even some of the gods themselves. And of course, one of them was Zeus. While Amphitryon was sailing his way back home, Zeus changed his shape and took on the form of Amphitryon. He showed up at the home of Alkmene in Thebes and pretended to be her future husband, and he told her all about his successful expedition. When the day was over, Zeus, disguised as Amphitryon, used his powers to make the night last as long as 3 nights, and he used the extra time to have plenty of victory sex with Alkmene. When Zeus was gone, and the real Amphitryon finally arrived, he triumphantly entered Thebes. He no doubt expected to sweep a gracious Alkmene off her feet and carry her off into marital bliss. Instead, he received a disappointing welcome from a very confused Alkmene, who thought she'd already welcomed him back, and quite passionately at that. The seer, Tiresias, had to explain what had really happened, and the two were finally married for real. From all this, Alkmene became pregnant with children from each father. Those children would be the twins, Alcaeus and Iphicles. Before they were born, as Alkmene's pregnancy progressed and her belly swelled, Zeus decreed that the next descendant of Perseus to be born would become the king of Mycenae. The king of the universe intended that the next descendant of Perseus would be Alcaeus, the child of Alkmene who was really his son. But Zeus's wife Hera heard her husband's decree and was annoyed about him having yet another child from an affair with a mortal woman. So Hera decided to mix things up. While Alkmene was expecting her children, at the same time, Sthenelus, the uncle who had banished Amphitryon and Alkmene, and his wife, Nikope, were also expecting the birth of one of their own children. This child would be a son named Eurystheus. The goddess Hera persuaded the goddess of childbirth, Eileithyia, to delay Alcaeus' birth, and then, at the same time, to speed up the birth of his uncle, Eurystheus, so that baby was born premature. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, Eileithyia, or Lucina as she was called in Rome, delayed the labor of Alkmene by sitting in her bedroom with crossed legs and crossed arms. The intent in this version was more sinister, that the unborn Alcaeus would be killed in the difficult birth. However, while Alkmene moaned and lay in pain, her maid, Galanthus, found Eileithyia in the room and tricked the goddess into relaxing. Alcaeus was born, and Hera, angry at the plan failing, turned Galanthus into a weasel. But while Alcaeus was born alive, at least half of Hera's plan worked. Eurystheus, the child of Sthenelus and a grandson of Perseus, was born first. And thanks to Zeus's divine decree and the fact his father was already king, Eurystheus was fated to become the ruler of Mycenae. Back to the twins Alcaeus and Iphicles. Several sources tell how after they were born, when the twins were 1 year old, 2 snakes appeared in their bed. You might think 2 small, vulnerable babies would be no match for 2 poisonous and perhaps ravenous snakes. Alcaeus wasn't a normal infant, though. He strangled the snakes before his parents even had a chance to save their children. Where the snakes came from is not consistent. In some sources, the snakes were sent by Hera, who intended for them to kill Alcaeus. In other versions, we get a weirder, more disturbing idea. After Amphitryon learned of Zeus's trick on Alkmene, he figured only one of the babies was actually his own son. To try and figure out which was which, he snuck the snakes into the twins' cradle. Alcaeus, really the son of Zeus, was the one strong enough to kill the snakes. And from that, Amphitryon learned that Iphicles was actually his own son. Diodorus and Apollodorus detail the later youth of the twins. As the members of a noble family, they were educated in chariot driving, wrestling, archery, swordsmanship, and even lyre making. They had tutors for each of these subjects, and their tutors were some of the most accomplished people around. Their father, Amphitryon, taught them to drive chariots. Autolycus, the trickster hero of a few episodes ago, taught wrestling. Another hero, named Castor, is sometimes named as their teacher for fighting with sword and javelin. Eurytos of Ocalia was their archery teacher. We don't know a whole lot about this hero, but eventually, years later, he challenged Apollo to an archery contest, and the god killed him for daring to think he could beat the god. But before that happens, he's going to run into Alcaeus yet again. The man who taught Alcaeus and Iphicles to play the lyre was Linos, the brother of another famous and accomplished musician, Orpheus. I'll talk about Orpheus in a future episode. Out of all these subjects, Alcaeus excelled in the more physical ones. He did not prove to be particularly talented in music. One day, a frustrated Linos hit his student. Alcaeus went into a rage. He killed Linos by hitting him with his own lyre. This won't be the last time Alcaeus shows a problem with rage. But hoping to grow him out of it, after Linus's death, Amphitryon sent Alcaeus to live and work on a cattle farm in the countryside. Years passed, and the hot-headed youth did mature. By the time he was 18, he stood 7 feet tall, fire flashed in his eyes, and he never missed a shot with a bow or a javelin. There was no question he was a son of Zeus. At that time, yet another beastly creature was causing problems in the area. The lion of Citherion was ravaging the livestock of Amphitryon and another man named Thespius, who was the king of Thespiae. Alcaeus left the farm and set out to kill the lion. On his way, he visited the palace of Thespios. Thespios entertained Alcaeus for 50 nights. The king had a wife named Megamede and 50 daughters. He was very impressed by the strength, size, and fierce appetite of the young man, and hoped his daughters had grandsons even a little bit like him. Thespios decided to try and make sure that happened. Each night, after feasting Alcaeus, Thespius sent one of his daughters to go and sleep with the hero, hoping to end up with grandsons who were descended from Zeus. Alcaeus, for his part, thought he was sleeping with the same girl 50 times, but he ended up giving each of the 50 daughters a son, just how Thespios wanted. Afterwards, Alcaeus set out and killed the lion. He skinned its corpse, made a robe out of its skin, and wore the gaping mouth of the creature as a hood. Continuing on, Alcaeus encountered messengers sent by King Erginos of the minions of Orchomenos. Previously, the minions had defeated Thebes in a war. These messengers were sent to collect a tribute of 100 cows from the Thebans. Alcaeus stopped them from going any further. He chopped off the ears, noses, and hands of the messengers, made them wear the severed body parts as necklaces, and sent them back to their king. In response, Erginos led an invasion of Thebes. As the army approached, the Thebans grew worried. They had already been defeated by Orchomenos, and they were in no shape to fight against the minion army yet again. The goddess Athena went to Alcaeus and provided him with weapons. Since he instigated the whole thing, he took command of the Theban defending force and marched them into the plain to face the coming army. The fighting was fierce. Erginos was killed, and the invaders retreated. The defeated minions were forced to pay double the tribute, so 100 cows, this time 2 Thebes. Alcaeus had led the Thebans to victory, and the city was now better off than before. Sadly, Alcaeus's father Amphitryon was killed in the fighting. Nevertheless, as a reward for his work, Creon, the king of Thebes, gave Alcaeus his oldest daughter, Megara, to marry. Creon also gave his younger daughter to Iphicles, although Iphicles was already married and had a son of his own with a woman named Automedusa. So Alcaeus and Megara were married, and it was a grand affair. Since he was technically their relative, some of the Olympians even provided him with gifts. Apollodorus says Hermes gave him a sword, Apollo a bow and arrows, Hephaestus gave a golden breastplate, and Athena provided a fine robe. The earlier mythographer Diodorus included a gift from Poseidon too, horses. Alcaeus and Megara began their new married life in Thebes, and soon began raising their own children. The number of children varies in several sources. The Athenian Euripides says they had 3 sons, but the earlier poet Pindar put the number at 8, and it seems this was the tradition dominant in the real city of Thebes. But their happy family life was not to last. Eventually, the terrible rage of Alcaeus returned, and he lost his mind. Or, the goddess Hera, still harboring a grudge against the son of Zeus, made him go insane. Either way, the result was gruesome and tragic. Alcaeus tossed his children, his wife in some accounts, and even his brother Iphicles' children, into a roaring fireplace. They all burned to death. Once Alkmene learned what he had done, he left a devastated Thebes behind and went into exile. He had committed some of the worst crimes imaginable in ancient Greece, the murder of family members. He made his way back to the palace of Thespios and his 50 daughters, so the king could conduct a ritual cleansing of the hero. Next, Alkmene consulted the oracle at Delphi to learn how he could gain forgiveness for his crimes. He was told to go to Tiryns, and to enter the service of his uncle Eurystheus for 12 years, or some other extended period of time. There, he was to complete labors, and if successful, he would be rewarded with forgiveness and immortality. During this prophecy, the oracle also did not call him by his name. Instead, he was referred to as Heracles, Hera's glory. And so Alkmene shed his birth name and would be called Heracles ever afterwards. Those are the myths surrounding Amphitryon and the early years of Heracles. Today's retellings mostly followed the framework recorded by Apollodorus' library, with some added clarifications from other sources as I went. There were the adventures of Amphitryon, the seduction of his wife Alkmene by Zeus, and the birth of a set of hero twins. In the early years of Alkmene Heracles, we get examples of his own heroic exploits, but also a dangerous rage hiding below the surface, and a divine enemy in the form of Hera. Both of those came together in Alkmene's tragic murder of his own family, which serves as the trigger for his next adventures. There is not really a true set-in-stone order for Heracles' adventures. Different sources give different orders, and one source, the play Heracles by the playwright Euripides, gives a version with some key differences from the order I just laid out. In Euripides' play, Creon is the rightful king of Thebes, but his rule is not secure. He is challenged by another man named Lycus. Back in the Antiope episode, I went through a list of the kings of Thebes after the founder hero Cadmus died. Lycus was one of those kings. The Lycus in Euripides' play is supposed to be the son of that Lycus, the earlier king of Thebes. Euripides' play is opened with a speech by Amphitryon, where he explains the background, saying Lycus, the son, killed Creon and took over Thebes. Trying to secure his own rule, Lycus is ruthless in sweeping away all that remains of Creon's old regime. His attention soon becomes fixed on Heracles' family, since his wife Megara was Creon's daughter, and their children are Creon's grandchildren. Heracles' father Amphitryon is also targeted, since he was a steadfast ally of the now-dead king. During the course of the play, the whole family hides in a temple, attempting to seek refuge from the wrath of Lycus. The cruel king arrives and mocks them. He claims Heracles is dead, and that his children will try to avenge their grandfather Creon, putting Thebes at risk. Lycus says if they don't leave the temple to be executed, he will simply order it burned down on top of them. Megara refuses to die a coward's death, and decides to go with the more honorable route of a clean execution by Lycus. At the family house, she prepares her family for their deaths. But when Lycus returns, he finds only Amphitryon ready, and angry, storms in to drag Megara and the children to their execution. Inside, he finds Heracles, who has at just the right time returned from his famous labors. Heracles kills Lycus and saves his family. Sounds great, right? But this is a Greek tragedy for a reason. And this happy ending is not actually the end of the play. With Lycus dead, Iris, the messenger of the gods, arrives. She says the goddess Hera has sent her to drive Heracles insane. Heracles kills his children, and then, when he goes to kill Amphitryon, Athena makes him fall into a deep sleep. When he awakens, Amphitryon explains what happened, and Heracles, devastated, leaves Thebes forever and travels to Athens. And with that, the play ends. In this play by Euripides, you can see the order of events in the Heracles myths is altered. One small difference concerns Amphitryon. In this play, he's still around, but in other versions he died in combat while Heracles was still a young man. Besides that, there's the main difference. We still have the tragic murder of Heracles' family, but here, their deaths, and Heracles' need to be purified for them, are not the cause for him going on his famous adventures. Instead, these events happen after the labors are already over. To me, it's a weird difference. Why then was Heracles away from home anyway? I suspect the unsaid reason in the play is that he was told completing the labors would make him immortal. But it could just be he's a hero, and going on quests is just what heroes do. For what it's worth, this version is widely considered to be Euripides' invention, because it's more dramatic to have Heracles, at the peak of his glory, come home victorious and then face the tragedy. Nevertheless, it just illustrates that the Heracles myths were a collection of stories, and they only gradually got organized into a more systematic framework. The Heracles myths were not totally set in stone, and Greek writers, like Euripides, were more than happy to massage them into new shapes. And that's all for today. Next episode, we'll pick up from my Apollodorus-based Heracles retelling, and get into what Heracles did after receiving his instructions from the Oracle of Delphi. So stay tuned for that, and thank you for listening.